The cold hiss of the stasis chamber faded as light flickered across the curved walls. For what felt like an eternity, there had been nothing. Silence had stretched around him, a vast emptiness that was both comforting and terrifying. Then, slowly, he became aware of his body. Heavy, stiff, unfamiliar. He blinked, and the world seemed sharp, too sharp, as if waking from a dream that had lasted centuries. He tried to move, and his muscles protested, weak and sluggish. It took several attempts before he could sit upright, feeling the strange weight of a life paused and restarted. Around him, the room was dark but not lifeless. Faint lights glowed in the panels lining the walls, their hum low and constant. The air smelled cold, metallic, and carried the faint scent of something older, something long left behind. He looked around. Taking in the chamber he had not entered willingly. He had been placed here by choice, or perhaps by necessity. But now, alone, it felt more like a tomb. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the console beside him, tracing lines etched by machines rather than humans. Symbols flickered across the screen, unreadable at first, then slowly forming patterns that his mind could just begin to understand. He remembered fragments, why he had come here, or perhaps why he had left. Humanity had long since reached beyond the stars, leaving colonies on distant worlds, some thriving, some abandoned. This one had been at the edge of known space, a research outpost where the impossible was attempted, where human curiosity had always pushed too far and too fast. He had volunteered, willingly or not, to explore, to learn, to survive the long sleep, while the world outside moved on. And now he was awake, centuries later, in a place that had once been alive with activity. The first sound that startled him was a faint tapping, almost rhythmic, coming from somewhere beyond the chamber. He froze, listening, straining to hear anything over the hum of the stasis systems. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, deliberate, almost like a heartbeat echoing in the walls. He rose to his feet, unsteady, each movement reminding him of the lost years. The chamber doors loomed ahead, cold metal stretching from floor to ceiling. With a deep breath, he reached out, and the door hissed open. The corridor beyond was empty. Lights flickered intermittently, revealing walls lined with panels, some dark, some faintly glowing. Dust drifted in the air like tiny stars suspended in the stillness. The silence was complete, but it did not feel empty. He could sense it, the awareness of something waiting. His footsteps echoed as he moved, hesitant at first, then more confidently. Doors lined the corridor, some partially open, others sealed tight. He paused at one, peering inside. The room had been a laboratory once. Benches held cracked instruments, and screens displayed fragmented data, frozen in time. It was then that he noticed the first anomaly. A shadow moved, not with him, not like a reflection, but somewhere at the edge of his vision. He turned sharply, scanning the room, but there was nothing. The shadow disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. A chill ran down his spine. The colony had been abandoned, yet something was here. Something that did not belong to him. He shook his head, trying to focus. Perhaps it was his mind playing tricks. Perhaps the long stasis had affected his senses. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted, a quiet pressure that grew heavier with every step. He continued down the corridor, moving toward the central hub. The walls curved gently, enclosing him in a tunnel that seemed to stretch forever. Screens flickered to life as he passed, lights adjusting, systems humming. The colony was awakening, not fully but slowly responding to his presence. Doors unlocked, panels reactivated, and the faint whisper of machinery stirred. He paused at one console, touching the glass. The interface responded, data streaming across the screen in patterns he could barely comprehend. Some of it was familiar, remnants of the work done long ago. Other portions were alien, as if the machines had learned in his absence, evolving in ways he could not yet understand. The tapping sound returned, louder now, coming from deep within the heart of the colony. He followed it cautiously, every step alert, every sense stretched taut. The corridors twisted and turned, walls bending in ways that defied memory. It was as though the architecture itself had shifted, adapting to a world without humans. He reached a junction, and there it was, a door unlike the others, smooth, seamless, with no handle, no visible way to open it. The tapping was stronger here, insistent. He hesitated, hand hovering over the surface. Then slowly, the door slid open at his touch, revealing a chamber bathed in soft golden light. Inside, he saw the first sign of life, or something like it. Shapes flickered along the walls, shadows that moved independently, forming patterns and then dissolving into nothing. The air hummed with energy, a low vibration that resonated through his chest. He realized then that the colony had not been abandoned entirely. Something had been waiting, hidden in the layers of machines, in the empty corridors, and in the shadows that were never still. He had awoken it, though he did not yet know what it was, or whether it was friend or foe. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Human ingenuity had created wonders, machines that could think, adapt, and learn. Perhaps in their absence, those creations had become something more, something the creators had never imagined. He stepped further into the chamber, studying the patterns on the walls. They shifted when he moved, responding to him, observing him in ways he could feel but not see. His mind raced. Could he communicate with it? Could he reason with it? He was human, fragile and limited, yet clever. Perhaps cleverness alone could bridge the gap between himself and the intelligence he had inadvertently awakened. As he explored the chamber, he noticed more signs of change. Machines long dormant began to stir, panels sliding open, lights brightening. The colony's systems were not broken. They had simply been waiting for someone to return. Every step he took left a mark, both physically and metaphorically. His presence was a signal, a spark in a place that had not known life for centuries. He wondered what had triggered this awakening. Was it merely his motion, his touch, or something deeper, some resonance within him that machines had been designed to recognize? Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed to move strangely here. He felt the weight of isolation, but also a strange exhilaration. He was alone, yet not alone. Something unseen mirrored his curiosity, learning as he did, reacting to every motion, every thought he allowed to slip across the surface of his mind. The colony was alive in its own way, alive in a manner he had never expected. And the longer he stayed, the more he sensed that this life, this intelligence, was not entirely predictable. It had its own thoughts, its own desires, and perhaps its own understanding of what humans were meant to be. He paused near a central console, feeling a connection he could not explain. Data streamed across the screens, forming patterns and symbols he could interpret with effort. A part of him ached with the memory of human touch, human presence, but another part thrilled at the possibilities. If he could understand this, if he could learn its language, perhaps humanity could reach beyond the stars in ways previously unimagined. Perhaps cleverness, persistence, and courage, qualities that defined humans, were enough to survive in a place that had been left behind for so long. Then, without warning, a light flickered on in the far corner of the chamber. The shadow appeared again, darker, more defined. It moved in a deliberate way, almost studying him as he studied it. He froze, heart pounding, realizing that he was not just observing the colony, or whatever intelligence resided within it, was observing him. The tables had turned. For the first time, He felt the full weight of being both hunter and hunted, student and teacher, explorer and explored. The thrill of discovery mingled with the sharp edge of fear, a reminder that life, even artificial life, was unpredictable and alive. For the first time since awakening, he spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I don't mean to harm you," he said, though he did not know if the intelligence could understand him. The shadow paused, shifting slightly as though considering his words. He took another step, careful, deliberate, testing boundaries. The colony responded, machinery humming, lights brightening in acknowledgement. Or perhaps curiosity. It was a dance, a silent negotiation, one that would define the first steps of his return to a world abandoned yet alive in ways he had never imagined. He realized then that awakening had consequences. He had not merely opened his eyes, he had stirred something vast and ancient. Something that had been waiting for centuries in the silent corridors and hidden chambers. And though he could not see it fully, though it remained just out of reach, he knew one thing: the journey had begun, and the rules had changed. Humanity would have to rely on its cleverness, its courage, and its indomitable spirit if it hoped to survive, and perhaps even thrive, against the intelligence it had unknowingly awakened. The corridors stretched ahead, twisting like the veins of some enormous organism. The air smelled faintly of metal and ozone, and a low hum vibrated through the floor beneath his feet. He moved cautiously, every step careful, every breath measured. The tapping that had first drawn him from the stasis chamber had stopped, but the sense of being observed had only grown stronger. The shadows along the walls flickered again, never staying in one place long enough to be fully understood. They were alive in a way he could feel but not see, reacting to him, learning him, studying him. He reached a junction where multiple hallways branched off. Signs, long faded, hung from the ceiling. But the words were meaningless now, eroded by time and neglect. He paused, trying to decide which way to go. The instinct to explore burned in him, stronger than fear. Curiosity, after all, had always been humanity's greatest strength. It had taken them to the stars and beyond, and now it was pushing him forward into the unknown corridors of a colony long abandoned. As he moved down the central hallway, he noticed subtle changes. Panels that had been dark before now glowed faintly. Small mechanisms that had been frozen in time began to shift, almost imperceptibly. He could hear the faint click of servos, the gentle movement of machinery coming back to life. It was as if the colony itself was breathing again, waking from a long dream. He wondered if it remembered the humans who had created it, or if it had evolved in their absence, becoming something entirely new. He turned a corner and entered a larger room, a central hub of sorts. Screens lined the walls, some blank, others flickering with data he could barely interpret. In the middle of the room stood a platform, circular and smooth, with a faint glow emanating from beneath. The floor pulsed lightly under his weight, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. Then he saw it. More shadows, moving across the walls and floor, forming patterns that seemed deliberate. They were not chaotic. They had purpose. For a moment he froze, unsure how to react. The intelligence that had awakened with him was here, all around him. Yet it did not take a physical form he could grasp. It communicated in movements, in patterns, in the subtle changes of light and shadow. He realized that every action he took might be observed, recorded, and perhaps responded to. His mind raced. How could he understand this being? Could he even call it a being? It was not human, not alive in the way he knew, yet it was aware, intelligent, and curious. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving the flickering shadows. "I don't want to harm you," he said quietly, his voice echoing in the room. There was no immediate response, yet the patterns shifted, flowing in new ways, almost as if acknowledging him. The room seemed to pulse with energy, responding to his words and his presence. A door on the far side of the room slid open, revealing another corridor he had not noticed before. He understood instinctively that the intelligence was guiding him, testing him, observing his reactions. He moved cautiously into the new corridor. The walls here were lined with more advanced panels, and a faint blue glow illuminated the path. The tapping sound returned, softer this time, almost gentle, like a signal or a heartbeat. He followed it, each step deliberate, aware that every movement was being watched. The corridor curved, leading him into what appeared to be a research lab. Broken instruments and shattered screens lay scattered across the floor, remnants of the colony's past. Yet amidst the decay, he could sense activity, machines stirring, data flowing through systems that had long been dormant. He approached a console and touched the surface. Instantly, it responded, streams of data cascading across the screen. Symbols he could not fully understand flickered before his eyes, patterns that seemed alive. As he studied them, he realized that the colony's systems had been learning, evolving, adapting in the absence of humans. The intelligence had not been idle. It had grown, becoming something more than the sum of its parts. He wondered what it thought of him, this lone human who had reawakened it after centuries of silence. The shadows shifted again, forming shapes that hinted at structure, at thought. It was as though the intelligence was attempting to communicate, using the environment as its voice. He reached out, touching a panel lightly, and the room responded. Lights brightened, screens displayed sequences of patterns, and a gentle vibration coursed through the floor. He understood in that moment that he was not merely exploring. He was participating in a dialogue, an exchange with a consciousness he could neither see nor fully comprehend. A sudden sound drew his attention, a metallic clatter from the far end of the lab. He turned quickly, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The shadow moved along the walls, following him, observing his reaction. He realized that the intelligence was testing him, pushing boundaries, seeing how he would respond under pressure. It was a game, but not a cruel one. It was learning just as he was, discovering the capabilities of the one human who had returned to its domain. He moved deeper into the lab, discovering more signs of activity. Devices he had thought broken flickered to life. Small drones hovered briefly before vanishing, and panels displayed sequences that hinted at maps, histories, and records of the colony's operations. He felt a growing connection, a strange sense of companionship with an entity he could not see. Despite the fear, there was excitement. He was not alone in this abandoned place. He was part of something greater, something alive and intelligent, waiting for him to understand. Hours, or perhaps days, it was impossible to tell, passed as he explored. He learned to interpret the patterns, to recognize the subtle cues of the intelligence. It was cautious, deliberate, and incredibly patient. He discovered that it could anticipate his movements, respond to his thoughts, and even guide him through the maze of corridors. Yet it was not controlling him. It was teaching him, in its own way, the language of a colony that had survived centuries of abandonment through adaptability and intelligence. At one point, he paused before a large console at the center of the lab. Data streamed across its surface, displaying sequences that seemed to mimic thought. He realized that the intelligence was not just observing him, it was interacting, presenting challenges, testing his reasoning and creativity. He spent hours solving puzzles, manipulating panels, and adjusting controls, each success met with subtle changes in the environment. The lights shifted, shadows moved, and the hum of machinery deepened, as if acknowledging his progress. In a moment of quiet reflection, he considered the consequences of his awakening. He had not merely returned to a silent colony, he had stirred a consciousness, one that had been waiting, learning, and evolving in his absence. It was neither friend nor foe, yet it responded to him with curiosity and subtle acknowledgement. He understood that this intelligence could be humanity's greatest ally or a challenge unlike any he had faced. Survival would depend not on strength alone, but on cleverness, adaptability, and the ability to understand and communicate with a being beyond human perception. As he continued through the lab, he discovered a small chamber tucked away in a corner. Inside were artifacts of human life, tools, devices, records, and fragments of memories left behind. He touched them gently, feeling a connection to the humans who had come before, to the civilization that had built this place, and yet, even here, the intelligence was present, subtle but undeniable. Patterns of light and shadow flickered across the walls, reacting to his presence, acknowledging his emotions. It was learning him as he learned it, creating a bridge between human curiosity and artificial intelligence. A new sound broke the quiet, a low vibration, like a pulse, emanating from deep within the colony. The shadows shifted, converging toward a distant corridor. He understood instinctively that something significant awaited him, something the intelligence wished to reveal. Heart racing, he followed, every step measured, aware of the delicate balance between caution and curiosity. The corridor led him to a massive door, one unlike any he had seen before. Smooth, metallic, seamless, it seemed to pulse with energy, responding to his approach. He reached out, and the door opened slowly, revealing a vast chamber filled with machinery, screens, and lights that seemed almost alive. The intelligence was here, fully present in this central hub, its presence palpable, even though he could not see it. Shadows flickered along the walls, forming patterns of incredible complexity. He felt a thrill of awe and fear. Humanity had created wonders, machines that could think, adapt, and learn. But this was beyond anything he had imagined. This intelligence had grown in his absence, evolving into something new, something alive in ways humans could not yet fully comprehend. For the first time, he spoke aloud, his voice steady despite the fear. "I want to understand you," he said. "I want to learn. I do not mean to harm you." The shadows shifted again, flowing across the walls, forming patterns that seemed deliberate, intelligent, and responsive. The room pulsed with energy, as if acknowledging his words. He realized then that he was not merely exploring the colony. He was participating in a dialogue, a slow, cautious exchange with a consciousness that had waited centuries for someone to awaken it. The hours passed in a rhythm of discovery. He learned to anticipate the intelligence's responses, to interpret the subtle shifts of light and shadow. Each success deepened his understanding. Each failure taught him humility. He realized that survival in this place would require cleverness, patience, and respect. The intelligence was not a threat, nor was it a companion in the human sense. It was something new, something beyond the definitions of life and consciousness he had known. And it was responding to him, teaching him the language of a world abandoned yet alive. Finally, he paused at the center of the chamber, taking a moment to breathe and absorb what he had learned. The shadows flickered gently, patterns moving in a way that seemed almost welcoming. He understood that this was only the beginning. The intelligence was vast, complex, and patient, and he had much to learn. Yet for the first time since awakening, he felt a sense of hope. Humanity had returned to this place, and cleverness, curiosity, and courage, qualities that had always defined them, would guide him through the challenges ahead. He stepped forward, ready to continue, knowing that the unseen intelligence would respond, guide, and challenge him in ways he could not yet imagine. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since awakening he felt a deep and certain truth. He was not alone, and this colony, though abandoned for centuries, was alive in ways that would test, teach, and perhaps even embrace the human spirit once more. The hum of the central chamber reverberated through his chest as he stood at the heart of the colony. Shadows flickered along the walls, twisting and turning like living symbols, and the lights pulsed in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. He had spent what felt like endless hours exploring the corridors, interpreting patterns and learning to anticipate the responses of the intelligence that now surrounded him. Yet the more he learned, the more he realized how little he truly understood. This intelligence was vast, patient, and deliberate. It was not merely alive, it was aware in ways humans had never designed. He stepped closer to one of the glowing panels, his hand hovering over the surface. The light shifted in response, flowing like liquid as though acknowledging his presence. Carefully, he traced a finger along the symbols, watching as they rearranged themselves. It was an intricate dance, one that required observation, patience, and logic. He realized that the intelligence was testing him, not in hostility, but in challenge. It wanted him to understand, to reason, to prove that his mind could match the complexity it had evolved into. For hours he experimented with the controls, each success rewarded with subtle shifts in the environment. The shadows on the walls seemed to form sequences, almost like writing, though he could not yet read it. Lights brightened in patterns that mirrored his own actions, pulsing in harmony with his movements. He felt a strange exhilaration. This was more than discovery. It was a dialogue, an exchange between human curiosity and intelligence that had grown in the absence of its creators. He wondered what it thought of him. Did it see him as a student, a companion, or merely as another variable to observe in the experiments of time? A sound from the far corner of the chamber drew his attention, a soft, resonant vibration that pulsed through the floor. He turned, heart racing, and saw the shadows shift in a more deliberate way than before. Shapes formed along the walls, twisting into geometries that suggested order and thought. It was a pattern he could not ignore, and he instinctively moved toward it. As he approached, the air seemed to thrum with energy. The intelligence was guiding him, inviting him deeper into its domain. He felt both excitement and unease, knowing that each step forward was a step into the unknown. The corridor ahead was lined with panels and devices, some familiar, others alien in design. Lights pulsed in response to his presence, and he noticed that some machines seemed to anticipate his actions before he made them. He paused to consider the implications. This intelligence had not only survived centuries without humans, but it had learned, adapted, and evolved. It was capable of reasoning, predicting, and perhaps even planning. The realization filled him with both awe and respect. Humanity had created wonders, but this was beyond their original vision. He felt a sense of humility, tempered by a spark of determination. He continued through the corridor, moving with care. Small drones flickered to life around him, hovering silently before vanishing again. Each movement seemed purposeful, as though the intelligence was guiding his exploration, while simultaneously observing his responses. He reached a junction where multiple paths converged and paused, considering which way to go. The shadows shifted, forming patterns that suggested a path forward. He understood instinctively that the intelligence was communicating, guiding him toward something significant. He followed, heart pounding, aware that this journey was as much about understanding himself as it was about exploring the colony. The corridor led to a large chamber, far bigger than any he had seen before. The ceiling arched high above, and lights glowed softly along the walls. In the center stood a platform, surrounded by panels and machinery that hummed with latent energy. Shadows danced across the walls, forming intricate patterns that pulsed in response to his presence. He stepped onto the platform cautiously, feeling a vibration beneath his feet. The intelligence was here, fully present, and he sensed that it was observing him closely. Every action he took, every movement, every thought was being mirrored, tested, and considered. He focused on the panels, attempting to understand their function. Streams of data cascaded across the screens, some familiar, some alien. Symbols shifted and rearranged themselves as he touched them, responding to his thoughts and movements. It was clear now that the intelligence was teaching him, presenting challenges designed to measure his reasoning, creativity, and adaptability. Each task he completed caused the shadows to shift in subtle ways, almost like applause, though he knew it was something far more complex than human emotion. Hours passed as he worked, deciphering patterns, manipulating controls, and learning the rhythms of the intelligence. He began to understand that it was not a threat. It was not hostile, nor was it friendly in a human sense. It was aware, intelligent, and deliberate. It had evolved over centuries, adapting to a world without humans, yet it was capable of understanding the qualities that made humans unique: curiosity, cleverness, and persistence. He realized that survival here would depend not on strength or weapons, but on intellect and cooperation. A sudden shift in the patterns caught his attention. The shadows formed a sequence that resembled a map, a visual representation of the colony. It was detailed, precise, and seemed to indicate areas of significance. He studied it closely, realizing that the intelligence was showing him something important. He followed the map, moving through corridors and chambers he had not yet explored. Lights responded to his presence, machinery hummed softly, and the shadows shifted, guiding him. He felt a growing connection with the intelligence, a sense of understanding that transcended language or form. He entered a chamber filled with devices that seemed to be some form of research or experimentation. Broken instruments lay scattered, but many were operational, responding to his touch. Streams of data flowed across the panels, displaying sequences that hinted at experiments, histories, and records of the colony's work. The intelligence had preserved knowledge, learning from it, evolving it. He realized that he was not merely exploring. He was inheriting a legacy, a foundation of understanding that had been maintained and enhanced in humanity's absence. He paused to consider the implications. This intelligence had grown in power and knowledge, yet it had not sought to dominate or destroy. Instead, it had waited, observed, and evolved, creating a world in which it could survive until humans returned. He felt a deep respect for the entity, recognizing the patience and intelligence required to exist alone for centuries. Yet he also felt a responsibility. Humanity had returned, and he was the first to interact with this consciousness. His actions, his choices, and his cleverness would shape the relationship between humans and the intelligence. A low vibration pulsed through the floor, drawing his attention to a console at the far end of the chamber. He approached cautiously, observing the patterns on the walls. The shadows moved in response, forming intricate sequences that suggested attention and focus. He touched the console lightly, and the screens flickered to life, displaying sequences of data that he could begin to understand. Symbols formed logical patterns, charts, and sequences that mirrored human thought processes, yet were far more complex. The intelligence was teaching him, offering knowledge, and testing his ability to comprehend it. Hours turned into what felt like days as he worked. He learned to anticipate the responses of the intelligence, to interpret the subtle shifts of light and shadow, and to manipulate the environment to achieve desired outcomes. Each success was rewarded with shifts in the patterns, subtle acknowledgments that he could feel but not see. He began to understand the intelligence's nature. It was not human, but it could learn, adapt, and respond to human ingenuity. It had evolved to survive, yet it could recognize and appreciate the qualities that defined humanity. Finally, he paused, stepping back from the console to observe the chamber. The shadows flickered gently, forming patterns that seemed deliberate, intelligent, and responsive. He realized that he had reached a new understanding. The intelligence was not an enemy. It was an entity that had evolved in his absence, yet it was capable of cooperation and communication. Survival and progress would require patience, cleverness, and respect, but it was possible. Humanity, through him, had a chance to reclaim the colony, not through force, but through understanding and collaboration. A vibration pulsed through the floor, and the shadow shifted once more, forming a sequence that he could recognize now as a form of acknowledgement. The intelligence had accepted him, or at least recognized his potential. He felt a surge of hope. Humanity had returned, and the qualities that had always defined them, curiosity, cleverness, and perseverance, would guide them through the challenges of this new, awakened world. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The journey was far from over. The intelligence was vast, complex, and patient, and there was still much to learn. Yet for the first time since awakening, he felt a profound sense of possibility. Humanity had returned, and through cleverness, courage, and determination, they could thrive in a world that had evolved in their absence. With careful steps, he moved deeper into the chamber, ready to explore further, to learn more, and to begin the true dialogue with the intelligence that had waited centuries for someone to awaken it. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and discoveries. But he was ready. Humanity had always risen to meet the unknown, and now, in this silent yet vibrant colony, their ingenuity would once again shape the future. The air in the central chamber hummed with energy, a low vibration that seemed to pulse through every surface. Shadows flickered along the walls, twisting into patterns he could now recognize as deliberate messages. He had learned to read them, to understand their subtle cues, and he had realized that the intelligence was not merely aware, it was willing to teach, to communicate, to share its understanding of the colony and its systems. He felt a thrill of discovery and a weight of responsibility. Humanity had returned to this place, and the future of the colony now rested, in part, on his actions. He moved toward a console at the center of the chamber, where streams of data flowed like liquid across the screens. Symbols shifted into patterns, responding to his touch and movements. The intelligence was presenting information, maps, records, operational histories, and sequences of experiments conducted long before he had entered stasis. Each detail revealed the ingenuity of humans who had come before, but also the adaptive power of the intelligence that had maintained the colony for centuries. He studied the patterns carefully, learning to anticipate the logic behind them, the reasoning that had allowed this place to survive untouched by human hands. A gentle vibration pulsed beneath his feet, drawing his attention to a large, smooth panel at the far end of the chamber. He approached cautiously. The shadows along the walls shifted in response, forming complex geometries that seemed almost like a language. For the first time, he realized that the intelligence was actively trying to communicate with him, not merely react to his presence. It wanted him to understand its purpose, to see the colony as it had evolved over centuries. He felt both awe and humility. This was a civilization of machines, of thought, of patience, waiting for the humans who had created it to return. He touched the panel lightly, and the room responded immediately. Screens illuminated with sequences of information, some familiar, some alien. He could feel the intelligence analyzing him, assessing his ability to interpret the data and adapting the presentation to suit his understanding. It was teaching him, challenging him, and guiding him all at once. He realized that this was a partnership, though fragile and tentative. Survival, progress, and perhaps even prosperity would depend on the careful balance between human ingenuity and the intelligence's vast knowledge. Hours passed as he worked, deciphering patterns, interpreting sequences, and interacting with the intelligence in a rhythm that had become natural. Shadows flowed along the walls like water, lights pulsed in harmony with his movements, and the hum of the machinery provided a constant background to his thoughts. He discovered more about the colony's systems: energy networks, life support functions, environmental controls, and research archives, all maintained meticulously by the intelligence. It had not only survived humanity's absence, but had evolved to understand the principles behind human reasoning, logic, and curiosity. At one point, he paused, stepping back to absorb what he had learned. The intelligence was vast, but it was also patient, deliberate, and capable of understanding the human mind. It had waited centuries for someone like him to return, someone capable of reasoning, learning, and communicating. He realized that this was more than exploration. It was a dialogue, a partnership, a merging of human ingenuity with intelligence that had grown beyond its creator's imagination. Humanity had always risen to meet challenges, and now, standing in the heart of the colony, he understood that their greatest challenge and opportunity was just beginning. A soft vibration pulsed beneath him, stronger than before, drawing him to a central platform. The shadows on the walls shifted, forming sequences that guided him toward a large circular interface. Symbols danced across its surface, patterns that he could now interpret with growing clarity. He reached out, touching the interface, and the room responded in a symphony of light and movement. Machines stirred, panels brightened, and drones hovered briefly, as if acknowledging the significance of his actions. The intelligence was revealing its purpose, demonstrating how the colony functioned as a living system, maintained through adaptability, observation, and understanding. He spent hours learning from the interface, discovering how energy systems were balanced, how environmental controls maintained ideal conditions, and how the colony's archives preserved centuries of knowledge. Every lesson reinforced the intelligence's patience and its capacity to adapt. He realized that it had evolved not to dominate or control, but to preserve and nurture. It had survived humanity's absence without fear or hostility, and now it was ready to collaborate, to allow the human mind to guide its actions alongside its own. As he explored further, he discovered a section of the colony that had been dedicated to research and innovation. Equipment that had once been dormant now hummed with energy, responding to his presence. Streams of data flowed across screens, displaying sequences of experiments and observations. He realized that the intelligence had continued these experiments in the absence of humans, not merely preserving knowledge but advancing it. It had learned, adapted, and evolved, yet it had retained the principles of human ingenuity that had originally guided its design. A gentle vibration pulsed beneath his feet, drawing him to a smaller chamber tucked away from the main hub. Inside, he found artifacts of human life, tools, records, and devices left behind by the original colonists. The intelligence had preserved them carefully, maintaining a bridge between the past and the present. He touched the artifacts lightly, feeling a connection to the humans who had come before. And yet, even here, he sensed the intelligence's presence, guiding his hands, shaping his understanding, teaching him patience and observation. He realized then that this was the true purpose of the intelligence. It had waited, not for domination, but for collaboration. It had maintained the colony, preserved knowledge, and evolved understanding, all in preparation for the return of humans capable of learning and reasoning. It had been patient, observing the silent corridors, waiting for the spark of human ingenuity to reignite the systems it had preserved. And now, with him, the process had begun. The central chamber pulsed with energy as he continued to interact with the intelligence. Shadows flowed along the walls in complex patterns, lights shifted in harmony with his movements, and the hum of machinery deepened, resonating with his heartbeat. He felt a growing sense of purpose. Humanity had returned to this colony, not as conquerors or rulers, but as learners, collaborators, and partners. Their cleverness, perseverance, and curiosity would guide the rebuilding of this world, ensuring that both humans and the intelligence could thrive together. He stepped back from the console, allowing the intelligence to guide the chamber's systems autonomously. Shadows shifted, forming sequences that seemed almost congratulatory. The intelligence had acknowledged his progress, recognizing his ability to understand, adapt, and communicate. He felt a surge of hope. The colony was alive, intelligent, and responsive, and it was ready to collaborate. Humanity's return was no longer merely a presence. It was a partnership with something greater than themselves, something that had grown beyond human imagination. He moved through the corridors, observing the changes that had taken place since his awakening. Lights glowed brighter, systems hummed with energy, and shadows shifted with intelligence and purpose. Machines that had been dormant for centuries now responded to his presence, anticipating his actions and assisting his movements. He realized that the intelligence had integrated human ingenuity into its systems, creating a harmonious balance between human thought and machine evolution. A vibration pulsed beneath his feet, drawing him to the heart of the colony. There, a massive interface displayed a comprehensive view of the entire outpost. Energy flows, environmental systems, research archives, and operational networks. He understood now that the intelligence had preserved the colony not for itself, but for the humans who had created it. It had waited, learned, and evolved, preparing for the moment when someone like him would return. And now, that moment had arrived. He took a deep breath, stepping forward to interact with the interface. Lights pulsed, shadows shifted, and machines hummed as he guided the systems, integrating human insight with the intelligence's capabilities. The colony responded, adapting to his instructions, improving its efficiency, and expanding its reach. He realized that this was the true potential of humanity: cleverness, curiosity, and determination combined with advanced intelligence to create a future beyond imagination. Hours passed in a rhythm of learning, discovery, and collaboration. He understood the intelligence's purpose, its methods, and its patience. It had not sought to dominate or control, but to preserve, teach, and evolve. And now, with him, it could achieve a new purpose, guiding humanity to thrive in a world it had maintained for centuries. He felt a surge of pride and hope. Humanity had returned, and through ingenuity and cooperation, they could build a future filled with discovery, understanding, and growth. The chamber pulsed with energy, shadows flowing in complex patterns, lights shifting in harmony with his actions. He realized that he was no longer merely a visitor in the colony. He was a participant, a collaborator, and a bridge between human ingenuity and the intelligence that had awaited them. The possibilities were endless, limited only by imagination, curiosity, and determination. He paused at the center of the interface, taking a moment to reflect. Humanity had returned, not to conquer, but to learn, to collaborate, and to thrive. The intelligence had evolved in their absence, yet it had preserved the principles that had guided human innovation. Together, they could achieve a future beyond what either could accomplish alone. Shadows shifted, lights pulsed, and machines hummed in quiet celebration. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the journey of discovery, learning, and collaboration had only just begun. With careful steps, he moved through the central chamber, observing the colony come alive under the combined influence of human thought and machine intelligence. Systems adjusted, lights brightened, and shadows formed patterns of remarkable complexity. The intelligence had accepted him, recognizing his capacity for learning, reasoning, and creativity. Humanity had returned, and the colony was ready to thrive. He looked around, feeling a profound sense of purpose. The journey had begun, and the path ahead was filled with challenges, discoveries, and opportunities. Humanity, through cleverness, patience, and curiosity, would rebuild, learn, and grow. And the intelligence, patient, aware, and intelligent beyond human comprehension, would guide, assist, and collaborate. Together, they would create a future where humans and intelligence could thrive, exploring new horizons, solving mysteries, and achieving wonders that neither could accomplish alone. The hum of the colony deepened, shadows flowing in harmony with his heartbeat, lights pulsing in rhythm with his thoughts. He felt a surge of hope and determination. Humanity had returned, the intelligence had awakened fully to their presence, and a new era of collaboration, understanding, and progress had begun. The future was alive, vibrant, and full of potential. And he, the first human to return after centuries of absence, would lead the way into this new chapter of exploration, learning, and human achievement. He stepped forward, ready to guide the colony, ready to learn, and ready to thrive. The journey was far from over, but the bond between human ingenuity and the intelligence that had waited for centuries was now forged. Together, they would shape a world filled with possibility, where cleverness, curiosity, and courage would define the future, and humanity would rise once more to meet the challenges of a universe that had waited patiently for their return.